Welcome to our channel, The World of Ghosts and Demons. If this is your first time visiting, hello, I am David, the owner of this place. Please come into my house. I will take you to meet the spirits. Now, without making you wait any longer, please follow today's story. When she woke up in the morning, the first thing Lucy did was get out of bed and kiss her little son on the forehead before going straight to the kitchen to prepare breakfast for the whole family. Lucy and her husband had just moved to this city for a little over a month, and everything had just started to stabilize. Today was exactly a month. Frank, Lucy's husband, worked at the company's headquarters in the city, and she herself had been at home for nearly 2 years because she had to give birth and take care of her young child, and was planning to go back to work soon. When she arrived at her new home, everything was very strange, and the neighbors weren't close yet. The first month here really overwhelmed Lucy. If it weren't for the fact that her family had no choice, they wouldn't have chosen to come to such a crowded city. Before, Lucy's family lived in the countryside with her mother-in-law, but for the past year, Frank's job has constantly required him to be present at the headquarters to handle many issues. If he didn't arrange to move here, there was a high chance that Frank would lose his job. Seeing this, Lucy's mother-in-law, Mrs. Anna, also advised her and her husband to move to the city to prioritize Frank's work. Having said that, with the current economic situation, it is very difficult to find a good job in such a large company, not to mention that Frank's company also created conditions for his family to live in an apartment in a new urban area on the outskirts of the city. Mrs. Anna said that they should stay there temporarily. If things were okay, they could stay there permanently. Otherwise, they would think about it later. Because her mother-in-law said so, Lucy decided to listen, packed her things, brought her child and Frank to the city. Since moving to the city to work at the head office, Frank's job has been promoted and his salary is also higher than before. So, although she is a bit unfamiliar with the hustle and bustle of life here, Lucy still hopes that this will be a good start for the whole family. Speaking of Lucy's son, Ben, he is almost 2 years old, so the couple decided to find a daycare center to send him to work. That said, finding a nursery in the city is not easy. Although there are many private nurseries, not all of them are good. Lucy loves her child very much, so she is even more careful in choosing. The good ones have high tuition fees. She and her husband have just moved here, so they have a lot of expenses to take care of, so they can't afford it for the time being. After cleaning up breakfast for the whole family, Frank also went to work. Seeing that the weather was cool, Lucy decided to take her child to the park near her house to play, and conveniently asked everyone if there was a good private nursery nearby. The park was deserted today. Only a few old people were sitting on the bench talking to each other, so Lucy didn't ask. Lucy played with her child for a while, then sat down on the bench and played with her phone while watching Bo, but she didn't know how much time had passed when she looked up and her son was nowhere to be seen. Lucy panicked and ran everywhere looking for him. She was so scared that she was about to call Frank when suddenly she heard a baby crying from the nearby main road. Lucy looked over and saw that it was her child. Her heart was pounding with fear because there were many vehicles passing by. Lucy tried her best to call her child, stand still, and ran as fast as she could. But at this moment, Bo was toddling down the street. Seeing that danger was approaching her child, Lucy screamed loudly. Suddenly, a woman came in time to hug the child. Seeing that her child was safe, Lucy breathed a sigh of relief. Just as she ran to the place to say, "Thank you," Lucy was scolded by the woman. She blamed Lucy for not taking good care of the child. The child almost got into danger, and his life was in danger. After saying that, without giving Lucy a chance to reply, she handed Ben back to Lucy and quickly left without saying a word. Lucy stood there silently, staring blankly, until Ben called out, "Mom," which brought her back to reality. The little girl ran after the woman, intending to thank her. The moment Lucy touched her arm, Lucy suddenly felt a chill down her spine. Lucy's eyes widened, and she immediately let go of her hand. The woman also turned around, Her head bowed, and she didn't say anything, but her hand reached out to caress Lucy's son's face. Lucy unconsciously stepped back, then the woman also left. Looking in the direction she had just gone, Lucy saw an advertisement flyer on the ground nearby. The red flyer caught Lucy's attention, so she picked it up and looked at the information on it about a kindergarten called Red Scarf. Lucy held the flyer and pushed her son to find the Red Scarf kindergarten, because she saw that the address of this kindergarten was also near her house. The teacher in charge of the kindergarten greeted Lucy. Her smile was very friendly, and her attitude was very warm, making Lucy feel very sympathetic. But when she looked down at the red scarf on the teacher's wrist, Lucy suddenly paused for a few seconds, and goosebumps rose unconsciously, without knowing the reason. Following the teacher in charge inside, Lucy was taken on a tour of the nursery school. She had to say that she was very pleased, because in addition to the main classrooms, the nursery school also had skill classrooms for the children. Finally, the teacher in charge led Lucy and her mother to the class where Ben would study. There were 7 children studying there, all of whom were about the same age as Lucy's son. As soon as they saw Bo, they ran over to play with them, as if they had been friends for a long time. Lucy talked to the 2 teachers named Hyin and Lee, and seeing that they were attentive to the children, Lucy felt even more pleased. The nursery school's tuition wasn't too expensive, and the special thing was that all the rooms were equipped with cameras for parents to monitor. But the fact that such a large nursery school only had 7 children studying there made her a little uneasy. Lucy asked the teacher in charge directly and was explained that the nursery school had only been officially open for about 3 months, so it was natural that there weren't many children yet. Lucy stopped wondering after hearing this. However, her eyes were once again glued to the red scarves worn on the wrists of the teachers and the 7 children. After a while of careful consultation, Lucy decided to send her child to school here. She was given a uniform for her child, and of course, the red scarf was indispensable. Lucy frowned and thanked the teachers, then intended to carry her child home. The following week, she would start sending her child to school. As she was about to leave, a pretty little girl suddenly ran up and grabbed Ben's hand without letting go. Lucy tried to coax the child to let go, but she couldn't, so she took her hand away. But at that moment, Lucy looked at the child in surprise because the child's hand was so cold. That night, Lucy couldn't sleep. Seeing that his wife seemed pensive, Frank started asking questions. Lucy told her husband that she had found a nursery for her child, but still felt that there was a problem with that nursery. When her husband asked what the problem was, Lucy couldn't explain. She just had a hunch. Frank thought Lucy was thinking too much, so she should try sending her child to school for a few days. After listening to her husband's advice, Lucy felt a little more at ease. It was late at night, and the couple turned off the lights and went to sleep. On the table, a stream of bright red blood suddenly flowed out from the soaked red scarf. Lucy stood hesitantly in front of the gate of the Red Scarf kindergarten. While Bo was extremely excited, Lucy was hesitant, wanting to go in, but not wanting to. Not knowing what to do, the teacher in charge warmly welcomed Lucy and her mother, leading them into the classroom. At this time, only Miss Helen had come to class. Lucy's son was happy again, and his friends saw that, so Lucy left her son with the teachers and asked permission to leave. When she just reached the door, Lucy stopped when Miss Leah arrived. For some reason, Lucy felt very familiar, as if they had met somewhere before. When Lucy was about to leave the door, her son, who was playing happily with his friends, suddenly ran after Bo, crying loudly, not letting his mother leave the classroom. Seeing this, Mrs. Helen quickly hugged the boy. As soon as she was picked up, the boy stopped crying immediately, but when Lucy left the door, Bo cried loudly again. Lucy felt sorry for her son, but had no other choice. From the classroom window, cold eyes were still following Lucy, the corners of everyone's mouths curled up into a devilish smile. Lucy found an office job not too far from home, and today was also her first day at work. During lunch, A colleague came over to ask her how she was doing while eating and watching the camera on her phone. Lucy said that she had just taken her child to daycare today, so she was worried if he was crying a lot. The colleague smiled and said that every child who first goes to school cries a lot, but after a few days or half a week, they get used to it. Then she asked Lucy the name of the daycare because she was planning to change schools for her child. Lucy innocently replied that it was Red Scarf Daycare. After listening, for some reason, the colleague looked embarrassed for a few minutes, then left, his face as if he was trying to remember something. Lucy didn't understand what was going on and continued to focus on her phone, seeing Beau just sitting in a corner, crying, not playing with his friends like when his mother was there. Lucy felt so sorry for her son that tears welled up in her eyes. Looking at the remaining 7 friends, all of them were happily playing with Ms. Helen, but Ms. Leah was nowhere to be seen. At this moment, Lucy was called to a meeting by a colleague. Lucy quickly turned off her phone and put it in her pocket. She didn't have time to see Mrs. Leah appear on the screen, slowly walking towards her son. After the meeting, Lucy turned on the classroom camera to see that her children had gone to bed and the 2 teachers were sitting eating. Lucy tried to find out where her son was. Only when she saw Beau lying at the back against the wall did Lucy breathe a sigh of relief. At this moment, Lucy suddenly heard a giggle coming from the phone. She looked at the camera in shock. The chopsticks in Lucy's hand immediately fell to the floor. Her eyes stared fixedly at the screen, her whole body trembling. In front of her was a pale face with yellow teeth bared in a giggle. Her cold eyes were staring at her as if provoking her. It was Miss Leah. Lucy couldn't control her fear. She watched Miss Leah put down her chopsticks and started to move towards the children who were sleeping. She deliberately turned back to look at the camera and grinned as if to let Lucy see. Miss Leah quickly went to little Ben, took off the red scarf from her wrist and wrapped it around Lucy's son's neck. She held the 2 ends of the scarf and pulled hard while looking at the camera and laughing wildly. Lucy stood up and screamed loudly, her whole body trembling as she dialed the manager's number, but no one answered. Meanwhile, Ms. Leah was still holding the red scarf so tightly that Lucy could see her son's face gradually turning purple. In a panic, Lucy rushed out of the company and rushed to school. The manager was extremely surprised to see Lucy, but before she could ask anything, Lucy pushed her aside and quickly rushed to the 2nd floor to open the classroom door. But before Lucy's eyes were the scene of the children still sleeping soundly, the 2 teachers were still eating. Seeing Lucy's frank-cut appearance, the 2 teachers were also startled. Lucy stared at Ms. Leah and rushed to her son, her index finger tremblingly placed on his nose to check. Only when she saw her son breathing did Lucy begin to calm down and ask to see the kindergarten's camera. The manager did not object. Lucy watched for a while, but did not discover anything unusual, as if everything she had seen before did not exist. Lucy sighed and looked at the 3 teachers, stopping at Ms. Leah for a while longer. For some reason, her pale face and giggling smile on the camera appeared, making Lucy a little panicked. Calming down, Lucy apologized to the nurses, saying that she was too nervous on the first day of sending the child to the nursery, which caused such a situation. That night, Lucy told her husband about the strange thing that had happened. After hearing it, Frank didn't pay much attention because he and his wife had sent baby Ben to a few nurseries in the countryside before. But because Lucy loved her child so much and was so meticulous, she was often dissatisfied with the way others took care of her child and then brought the child home to take care of herself. This time, Frank thought it was the same as the previous times, plus the fact that Lucy had just returned to work, so she must have hallucinated due to too much stress. Frank tried to reassure his wife a few sentences and then turned off the lights to go to bed. The next day, Lucy continued to take her child to Red Scarf Nursery. Although she was still not completely reassured, she couldn't find a replacement nursery right away. Because of her uneasy feeling, When Ms. Leah wasn't there, Lucy sent a private message to Mrs. Helen asking her to pay more attention to her son. Bo was still the same as yesterday. When his mother was there, he was smiling happily with the teachers and friends. But when his mother left, he cried and hid in a corner in fear. Looking through the camera at her son still sitting in a corner, crying for his mother, Lucy couldn't help but feel sorry. Looking back at Ms. Helen and Ms. Leah, playing with the remaining 7 children, without any intention of comforting her son, Lucy couldn't help but feel sad. A moment later, the 2 teachers went out, but after 30 minutes had passed, Lucy still hadn't returned. Lucy intended to call the teacher in charge to ask, but she once again stared at the camera because the remaining 7 children were holding hands and walking towards Bo. They formed a circle around her son in the middle. They connected the 7 red scarves together into a long rope. Then a little girl held the rope and walked in front of Bo. The angelic smile on her lips suddenly disappeared, replaced by a devilish grin. The little girl, like Miss Leah, looked at the camera and smiled before tying the rope around the boy's neck. At this moment, all 7 children tried to pull the rope all over the room, dragging baby Ben on the floor. Hearing her son's cry, Lucy almost went crazy, while the 7 children continued to pull the rope happily until Bo's head was bleeding before they stopped, but only looked at each other and smiled before pulling again. Lucy screamed loudly at the same time as the phone screen showed red lines flickering for a while before going dark. Unable to think of anything else, Lucy frantically rushed to the kindergarten. No matter what happened today, she had to take her son away from that haunted place. Lucy went to Red Scarf Kindergarten to pick up her son. Her eyes filled with hatred as she looked at the 3 teachers. Even though when she appeared, everything had returned to normal, the camera showed nothing happening and there were no wounds on her son. But this time, Lucy decided to trust her intuition. She felt like the smell of blood was seeping into every corner of this nursery. Lucy carried her child out of the Red Scarf nursery as soon as the nursery door closed. The sound of children crying rang out again, along with the crazy laughter of the adults. Lucy decided to ask her grandmother to look after the child for a while she rearranged her work, while Frank helplessly let his wife decide. She did whatever she wanted. In the middle of the night, after putting the child to sleep, Lucy lay on the bed, tossing and turning. She took out her phone to scroll through the time, not knowing why she noticed the classroom camera app. Lucy thought to herself that the children were all home now, so why would she be in class watching? But in the end, she still clicked on it. Immediately, her eyes widened in horror when she saw Miss Leah's pale face on the camera screen with that creepy half smile. Not only Miss Leah, but also Miss Helen, her supervisor, and 7 children were in the room at this time. The children should have been at home with their parents, but they were still at the nursery, eyes wide open, staring at the camera. Lucy's breathing began to quicken, and her whole body turned cold, even though she had felt normal just a moment ago. The 3 teachers were feeding the children a bowl each. Lucy squinted at the bowl to see what they were eating and was horrified to find that the bowl was a bright red color, like blood. Lucy rubbed her eyes and looked again and was sure that it was raw meat still dripping with blood. Lucy covered her mouth in nausea, and when all 7 children put the raw meat into their mouths and ate it deliciously, Lucy couldn't stand it anymore and hurriedly ran into the bathroom to vomit. Frank also woke up and ran in worriedly. Lucy vomited all her green and yellow bile before calming down a bit. Looking at Frank in fear, she pulled him to the bed and showed him the phone. Frank watched for a while, and his eyebrows suddenly furrowed. Lucy asked her husband, "Look, what the hell is going on?" "What? I didn't see anything?" Lucy panicked and grabbed the phone to look again, but just as Frank said, there was nothing but darkness in front of her eyes. Everything she saw before had strangely disappeared. I saw clearly. I can't do it." Frank asked Lucy in confusion what she saw. Lucy said in shock, "Well, the teachers at the nursery are feeding the children raw meat, all bloody. Hearing that, Frank's face turned pale, and he felt nauseous at Lucy's words. "Are you crazy? What nonsense are you talking about?" Lucy wanted to say something more, but Frank waved his hand to stop her from saying anything. "I see you're under too much pressure about your child going to school. You can even think of something so stupid. I'm scared of you." Frank thought that Lucy was probably haunted by the thought of her son being away from his mother. She was afraid that it would be unsafe for someone else to take care of the child. In addition, Lucy often watched movies with lots of bloody and scary scenes, so she had hallucinations or random thoughts. Lucy looked at her husband snoring next to her and couldn't sleep. Seeing her son's red scarf on the table made her heart even more confused. The next day, Lucy decided to take a day off from work to take her child to find a new nursery. That morning, Lucy found another nursery with quite suitable conditions, although it was a bit far from home, but she agreed to wake up early to take her child. Unfortunately, when the teacher introduced the new class, Ben became very scared. He cried loudly when the teachers there held him and refused to play with the other children. No matter how she tried to comfort him, he wouldn't stop. Lucy had no choice but to take the child home, but for some reason, she passed by Red Scarf Kindergarten. The child stopped crying immediately upon seeing the kindergarten and became very happy. Lucy stood outside, looking into the school, feeling the chill still lingering. She turned around and asked her son, "Do you want to study here?" Ben nodded quickly, but after a while he shook his head, then nodded again, then shook his head repeatedly, leaving Lucy wondering what he was thinking. Lucy slowly took her son on. After all, she couldn't let him study here anymore. At that time, from the second-floor window of the school, cold eyes were still watching the figures of Lucy and her mother until they gradually disappeared. The sharp, black nails were so firmly dug into the window frame that they popped out and bled everywhere. Lucy had just brought her child back to the door when a neighbor nearby came over to ask a few questions. Seeing that she was also enthusiastic and friendly, chatting happily when Lucy mentioned her son studying at Red Scarf Kindergarten, her eyes suddenly widened. Her face turned pale. Then she avoided talking and went into the house. Lucy looked on blankly, not understanding what was going on, but she was even more certain that the kindergarten had a problem. Lucy had called her mother-in-law in the countryside to ask her to arrange to take care of her child for a few days until she found a suitable kindergarten for her child. But Mrs. Anna said she was in the middle of harvesting rice for someone and would not finish for another 2 days. So Lucy had to ask for 2 more days off from work to stay home and take care of her child. The next day, Lucy woke up from her nightmare, covered in sweat. She looked around and didn't see Frank and Beau anywhere. She walked around the house, but still couldn't see the figure of father and son. Lucy dialed her husband's number. Each ring passed, but Frank still didn't pick up. An invisible uneasiness rose in her heart. She remembered last night's dream. In the dream, Lucy took her son to Red Scarf Kindergarten. When she turned around to leave, her son suddenly grabbed her hand. Lucy just bent down to comfort him when the child suddenly grinned. Lucy was shocked because the child in front of her was not her son. That thing had a hideous face of a devil with 2 black eyeballs hanging in front of its eye sockets and scorch marks all over its face. From those burns, blood continuously flowed out, giving off a foul, fishy smell. Thinking of this, Lucy's heart burned even more. She hurriedly went out the door to find that kindergarten. Because Frank was busy and came home late last night, Lucy and the child had gone to bed a long time ago, so they had not told Frank that they had withdrawn the child from Red Scarf Kindergarten. As soon as Lucy reached the door, she saw Frank walking in from the gate. Just as Lucy had expected, he said that he had already taken the child to the kindergarten. Frank's words were like a thunderbolt, making Lucy even more panicked. Lucy quickly searched for her phone and opened the classroom camera app. On the screen was a scene of an empty classroom with no one in sight. Lucy seemed to have gone crazy and shouted at Frank, "Where is the child? Where is my child? Where did you take the child?" Seeing his wife panicking like that, Frank reassured her. "I told you I took the child to a daycare. Oh, and the teachers said that today the class went on a field trip to the zoo, so you didn't see the child on the camera. She also said that she had informed you last week, but you're strange. Why didn't you prepare anything for the child when the child went on a field trip?" Hearing this, Lucy's whole body stiffened. A cold air ran down her spine and rushed to her brain, making her unable to keep calm. Lucy excitedly grabbed her husband's collar, shaking him and crying, "Where did they go on a field trip? Where? Tell me." Today, the weather was quite gloomy and cold, and the zoo was also deserted. Deep in the area near the lake, only the in-charge and Miss Helen were seen removing all the red scarves from the children's wrists and her own to tie them into a long rope. They slowly walked towards Bo, holding a bloody rope made from red scarves in their hands. The nurse in charge grinned as she tied the rope to Bo's legs and pulled. The group dragged Lucy's son to the edge of a small lake in the zoo. Helen and the nurse in charge sneered and grabbed baby Ben, slowly drowning him in the lake. At this moment, Lucy rushed to the zoo, crying and running around looking for her son. When she was almost in despair, Lucy heard a woman's voice in her ear, directing her to go deeper into the zoo near the lake. When she arrived, Lucy witnessed the nurse and Helen trying to drown her son in the lake. Lucy immediately ran like crazy to push the two people aside and jumped into the lake to save her son. Looking at the child, his whole body was cold and wet. Lucy frantically shook her son, but no matter how she called, he remained motionless. Until Lucy saw the red scarf tightening around her son's neck. She hurriedly removed the scarf. Sure enough, as soon as she removed it, baby Ben woke up and started sobbing. Lucy hugged her son and cried until her throat was choked. Just then, Frank ran over and saw his wife hugging their son and crying loudly. Even though he didn't understand what was going on, he still ran over and hugged his wife and son. When Lucy calmed down, she handed the child to Frank, glaring at the two teachers and the children who were still standing and laughing strangely in front of her. Lucy angrily rushed at Mrs. Helen and the teacher in charge, pinning the two down on the empty ground. Lucy kicked them repeatedly, but the harder she tried, the more their eyes widened and they laughed loudly. The children around them were clapping and cheering strangely. Ms. Leah stood not far away, her head bowed, tears of blood silently flowing down. Seeing his wife lose her temper like that, Frank grabbed Lucy's hand and asked, "What are you doing?" Lucy was crazy. "I have to kill her, kill her. She wants to kill my child. I have to strangle her." "Who did you kill?" She and all these weird kids," Lucy said, while pointing at each person. But the more she pointed, the more confused she became. "What's wrong with you? There are no teachers or kids around here." Only then did Lucy startle and look around. There was no teacher or 7 kids anymore. They had disappeared at some point. Some people saw Lucy's loud and strange actions and came to look, point, and gossip. Lucy was so shocked that her legs and arms went limp that she collapsed to the ground, her heart filled with extreme fear. She was sure that kindergarten was full of ghosts. They wanted to kill her son. Thinking of that, Lucy crawled to her son and hugged him tightly, but her eyes were fixed on the red scarf beside her. Frank was also very confused when he saw this scene. Although he didn't see anything unusual, the fact that baby Ben appeared alone at the zoo, wet and crying, while his wife ran like crazy to protect their son, Frank somewhat understood that something was happening to his family. But this was not the time for Frank to care too much, because his top priority now was baby Ben. Since bringing their son home, baby Ben had a high fever. The couple immediately took him to the hospital for a checkup, but the doctor concluded that his health was normal and there was no problem. The two of them carried their son home and could only use traditional methods to cool him down. That night, baby Ben not only did not have a fever, but also showed signs of convulsions, making Lucy and her husband feel uneasy. After thinking for a while, Lucy decided to call Mrs. Anna and tell her everything her family had experienced. Mrs. Anna was a person of faith and spirituality, so when she heard the strange things her daughter-in-law told her, she immediately believed and blamed her for not telling her sooner. So it was too late, and she ended up in this situation. But then she also told Lucy and her husband to rest assured. Now she would go to Mr. Nate's house to ask about it. In Mrs. Anna's hometown, Mr. Nate's name was famous throughout the area. He was a famous shaman. Mrs. Anna and he also had a little relationship, so when something related to the spirit world happened, she often went to him for help. About 2 hours later, Mrs. Anna called Lucy back, but when she picked up the phone, it was Mr. Nate's voice on the other end. Thinking that her mother-in-law had told him everything, Lucy breathed a sigh of relief, but the more Mr. Nate spoke, the more serious he became. Your family's situation is not small. You and your son are being possessed by demons, but not just one. There are many. Even though they had predicted the situation, hearing what the teacher said, both Lucy and her husband felt a chill down their spines, especially Frank, who did not believe in spiritual things, but this time he could not ignore it. Teacher Nate added, "You two don't need to worry too much. I can help, but unfortunately, I still have a ceremony that I haven't finished yet. I will wait for 3 more days for your mother and I to come up. What we need to do now is to cut off the conductor so that those spirits will not torment the boy anymore." Lucy was confused and didn't know what the conductor was, so the teacher explained that it was something for spirits to reside in and could also be used to harm people. Think carefully, is there something like that that always appears next to the boy? Lucy thought for a while before remembering the red scarf, recounting the characteristics and strangeness of that scarf to Teacher Nate. The teacher immediately told Lucy to burn the scarf, making sure to burn it completely so that nothing was left. Lucy immediately rummaged through Ben's school uniform, and sure enough, the red scarf was still there. So she burned it immediately. The fire that came into contact with the scarf flared up fiercely, and the sound of painful cries and curses echoed in her ears in the wind. After a while, the space became quiet, and Lucy dared to look into the iron barrel used to light the fire. The red scarf was now just a pile of black slime, but on top of it appeared a drop of red blood that made her shiver. Lucy unconsciously breathed a sigh of relief just as Ben's cry rang out, and she hurriedly ran inside to see that he had woken up and was no longer as feverish as at noon. Lucy was overjoyed, but she knew she couldn't be negligent during the days waiting for Mr. Nate and Mrs. Anna to come. Lucy asked for leave to stay home to take care of her son and chanted continuously to pray for peace. Finally, on the 3rd day, Mr. Nate and Mrs. Anna came to Lucy's house on the weekend, so Frank also got to stay home. Because of the long journey, Lucy and her husband invited her mother and the teacher to eat and rest. In the afternoon, Lucy left baby Ben with a neighbor to look after, and her mother and the teacher went to the address of the Red Scarf Kindergarten. When they arrived, Lucy and Ha were extremely shocked. What they saw was not the spacious and bright 2-story kindergarten like before, but a desolate and overgrown pile of ruins. Lucy could not believe her eyes, thinking about how she had left her child to the devil to keep in this ruin for the past few days. Her whole body broke out in goosebumps. While Lucy's family was setting up the altar, Teacher Nate had walked around the area a few times, feeling the dense negative energy. When everything was ready, it was almost dusk. The teacher stood in front of the altar, looking straight at the ruins in front of him, chanting and mumbling prayers. About 15 minutes later, the empty land gradually became foggy. Suddenly, from somewhere, a cold wind blew. The 3 Lucy family members stood together in one place, but still felt the cold air running down their backs. From the ruins gradually appeared 3 large shadows and 7 blurry shadows of children. Along with that, the sound of wailing and painful screams echoed everywhere. When the wind gradually died down, the souls of those souls became more clearly visible. The souls of the 7 children saw Mr. Nate and were scared, huddled in a corner, and cried. There was a tall, skinny soul standing silently in a corner. Lucy recognized that it was Miss Leah. For some reason, Lucy felt that Miss Leah at this moment had a sad appearance, as if she wanted to say something, but stopped. As for Miss Helen's soul and the one in charge, they had turned into demons with thick fangs and tongues sticking out in front of their chests. Master Nate saw the 2 ghosts growling non-stop. Then he slowly said, "You 2 have created too much evil karma. From the time you were alive until the time you died, you turned into ghosts who wanted to harm people. Now there is only one way, which is to follow me to the temple to practice to gradually resolve your karma." Hearing Master Nate say that, the 2 ghosts laughed hysterically. Resolve your karma? Why do we need to resolve it? When we are dead, we don't need to be shy anymore. The ghost in charge turned to Lucy and laughed loudly, saying in a gloomy voice, "Don't think that inviting this teacher here will scare me. Your children will not be safe with me. We will kill them all." Lucy panicked when she heard these words. Her whole body unconsciously trembled. She had to rely on Frank's body and reassurance to stand firm. Having said that, the 2 ghosts in charge and Miss Helen rushed to attack Master Nate. In contrast to their ferocity, Teacher Nate slowly took out 2 charms from his pocket, sealed them, and mumbled something under his breath. Just as the 2 demons rushed in front of him, he quickly stuck the newly casted talisman on their foreheads. Both of them immediately stopped and fell to the ground as if they had lost all their strength. Only their eyes still showed sharp hatred. Teacher Nate bent down to take out 2 small white porcelain jars about the size of a fist from his pocket and sighed, "If you don't know how to turn back and keep them, it will only cause trouble and harm enough people." After saying that, he only saw the teacher lightly tap the mouth of the jar twice, and the 2 demons were immediately absorbed into it. As for the souls of the 7 children, because they were still young and had no intention of harming anyone, the teacher put their souls in a separate jar to bring to the temple to listen to Buddhist scriptures every day so that they could be liberated soon. Then the teacher turned to Miss Leah and pondered for a long time before speaking. "If you have anything to say, say it all, and then go." After saying that, the teacher walked to Mrs. Anna, only to see him put his hand on her forehead and lightly press her. Mrs. Anna immediately staggered and collapsed. Seeing his mother's abnormality, Frank reached out to help her, but the teacher waved her away, signaling that everything was fine. At this moment, Mrs. Anna slowly sat up from the ground and cried, "I really didn't want to harm these children. I just had no choice but to follow them." The spirit of Miss Leah in the body of Mrs. Anna slowly recounted. "More than 10 years ago, a private kindergarten named Red Scarf was opened here, and I myself was one of the teachers of this kindergarten. The children studying in the school all wore a red scarf on their wrists, and so did the teachers. At first, everything was normal, but then the school was suspended because of child abuse that was discovered by Miss Leah herself. Every day, when she went to teach, she witnessed Miss Helen and the teacher in charge abusing the children, which made Miss Leah unable to ignore, even though her denunciation could cause her to lose her job. Everyone thought that was the end of it. Miss Leah also looked for work elsewhere. But then, one time, when she stopped by the school to pick up some things she had left behind while teaching, she discovered that the school was closed during the day, but still operated illegally at night. 7 parents still sent their children to this kindergarten at night because they were all night shift workers and could not look after their children. That same night, a huge fire, suddenly broke out at Red Scarf Nursery School. It took the firefighters a long time to put out the fire. Both teachers, Ms. Leah, and 7 children died in the fire. Everyone thought the fire was an accident, but in fact, it was because Miss Helen and the other teacher in charge could not stand the fact that the kindergarten was suspended. So when they saw Miss Leah coming over, they cursed her. Later, Miss Leah witnessed the two of them yelling and beating the children while feeding them dinner. Because Miss Leah tried to stop them, a fight broke out. Miss Helen and the teacher in charge even took water from the bathroom to splash on and cursed Miss Leah. The water accidentally splashed on the electrical outlet, causing a short circuit, resulting in all three people being electrocuted and lying on the floor. At that time, the 7 children in the classroom were too young to realize what was happening. In the end, the entire electrical system short-circuited, leading to an explosion and a fatal fire in the entire kindergarten. After her death, Miss Leah witnessed the 2 souls of Miss Helen and the teacher in charge not being able to escape, but turning into ghosts, wandering in the vacant lot of the kindergarten, along with the souls of the 7 children who created illusions to harm people every day. Miss Butt, she could not bear to see innocent children and their families being harmed, so she stayed to help the people around this area. She had been hallucinated many times, but because she knew about it, she was always on guard. Only 1 or 2 new families like Lucy would be tempted to bring their children here to study. Just like the previous times, Ms. Leah once again tried her best to help. Because she knew that Lucy loved her child and often watched the camera, her mother's intuition was sensitive, so she created those images to make Lucy feel scared and worried, then brought her child back. It was also Ms. Leah who saved baby Ben in time on the day Lucy took her child to the park to play. Previously, some people living in that area also tried to warn new neighbors like Lucy, but at night they were all scared and strangled by the ghosts of the 2 demons in this kindergarten. Because they were so scared, the people in that area later passed the story on to each other, because those souls had not yet been released. So mentioning the Red Scarf Kindergarten became taboo. That's why when Lucy's neighbors and colleagues heard the name of the kindergarten, they all turned pale and avoided the other place. After completely dealing with those 2 evil spirits and exposing the truth, Miss Leah's soul was no longer entangled with anything, following the shaman to practice and wait for the day of reincarnation. That night, when she got home, although everything had been resolved, Lucy still wanted to confirm it again, to verify. Lucy dialed the number to call the person in charge while waiting anxiously. Only when the operator's voice said that the number Lucy had just called did not exist did she breathe a sigh of relief. To be sure, Lucy searched for the classroom camera application to open it, but the application had disappeared from her phone, even though she was sure she had never deleted it. Lucy sat down on the chair and watched her husband and son play happily, then smiled in relief. And that was the end of today's story. Thank you all for listening and following. If you have any thoughts, feelings, or opinions about this story, please leave a comment. Now, goodbye and see you again. I hope you will have a great evening.